Well, Razorback fans, Arkansas has their challenges in front of them as they take on the Tennessee Volunteers this Saturday. How do they even stand a chance? Let's talk about it on today's Locked On Razorbacks podcast.
You are Locked On Razorbacks, your daily podcast on the Arkansas Razorbacks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome into Locked On Razorbacks podcast. I am your host, John Neighbors, and it is another special THV 11 edition here on a THV 11 Tuesday. We are joined by sports director of THV 11, of course, Tyler Cass. Tyler, appreciate you joining us, man. How's everything going?
Glad to be here as always. Glad to be safely back from AT&T Stadium and, marked safe from the Southwest Classic and all its faded glory.
Yeah, glad that they could finally end it on the exact note that it's been going for many years. So it's very fitting.
It lived.
Yep, that's right. That's right. It's very fitting the way it ended. But thing is the season has not ended. Arkansas still has plenty of games in front of them. And luckily for them, they get to have a bunch of these games at home. Well, of course, I don't know. The way they've been playing at home may not be the best thing. But still, they welcome in a top 5 team, one of the best teams in the country in the Tennessee Volunteers. And so when you're looking at this game, and I know that there's a few days until we get into it, but does Arkansas stand a chance in this one against Tennessee?
I mean, the easy answer is no. You just look at, all you got to do is look at Tennessee's scores and you go, it looks like they're playing UAPB every single week with what they're able to do offensively and defensively. I mean, look, you never say never in a college football game. I think Arkansas's had a uncanny ability this year to kind of drag people down to their level, but Tennessee is just a tier above anyone they've seen so far. So, I think we kind of said it last week is, hey, if Arkansas plays like they did against UAB, a game that they won, do they win any more SEC games? And I said only Mississippi State. And I think that's just how it's going to go. Yeah, Arkansas can stand a chance in this game if they show us things they haven't shown us yet this season. So are they capable of being a different team than what we've seen? That's kind of what it hinges on. And each week goes on and it kind of turns into, they are who we thought they were. So as of now, no, but if things magically change in practice this week and we get a brand new Arkansas team on the field, then maybe.
Well, we'll talk about Taylen Green here in a bit specifically, but I feel like if you look at all 5 games that Arkansas has played, they're 3-2, which I think if you would have said before the year started through your first 5 games, you'd be 3-2. Most fans, not saying they would have been happy about it, but they would have been like, okay, that makes sense. That means you beat your 2 teams like UAB and UAPB, and then you got 1 win against either Oklahoma State, Auburn, or A&M. Well, in this case, it was Auburn on the road. So I wouldn't say that it's been a disaster of a year, but there has been a feeling that some have had that the team is getting worse, which is not something you want to see. And Oklahoma State, when they lost that game, went to double overtime. Arkansas played really well, just had those little mistakes that were very costly and ended up being the difference in the game. And then kind of fast forwarding it to this past weekend against A&M, well, they still had the similar mistakes, only this time they didn't have the 650 total yards to go with or the big game by Landon Jackson or anything. Is this team getting worse and regressing, or are they just going up against better competition?
I think it's a mix of both. The competition does get better. Oklahoma State, it's hard to tell what they are at this point. They're certainly not a playoff team by a stretch of the imagination, but who knows in the Big 12. As far as the Razorbacks go, like you said, at least with Oklahoma State, you could point to that first half. You could point to the crazy offensive yardage totals and whatnot. And yeah, you want more points than yards, but it was still something. There was something you could point at as, hey, they did that really well. You build on that. You get better at the things you were bad at, and you might have something here. But the things that were bad have stayed bad, and the things that are good, Taylen Green went from, against Oklahoma State, one of the best statistical games that Arkansas quarterback has ever played, to someone who, Sam Pittman even said this week, is playing without confidence. And, some of that's on the offensive line, an issue that's not just gotten worse this season, but seems to have gotten worse every year the last 3 years. But some of that's just on Taylen and the guys around him. So, yeah, you've seen regression at what was good, and the things that are bad have not improved in any way. And then you throw in the fact that as the season goes on, more and more guys get hurt or injuries are revealed, and it's the wrong direction, to be trending pretty much across the board for Arkansas.
And it's also, I think, is equally frustrating for Razorback fans when they see that it ends up being constant one-possession games that they end up losing. I know it's always woulda, coulda, shoulda, but Arkansas could very easily be 5-0 right now. Like they could easily be 5-0.
Like you said, if this team was 3-2, and you said to someone before the season, hey, they're going to be 3-2 at that point, you're not thrilled. You're going, all right, that's about what we thought, and maybe a little better because like you said, you win the 2 you absolutely have to win, and then you win 1 of the other 3, you're fine. But it's the way it goes about. I mean, heck, if you lose to A&M by 21 and Oklahoma State by 14, and both of those are ranked teams, you're going, all right, it's early in the season. They were still, getting their stuff together. Let's see how they build on that. But you lose to those teams by 1 score in games that you should have won if you didn't do, the most Arkansas things. It's so much more frustrating.
Well, we'll continue to talk about this here on a THV 11 Tuesday on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, so stay with us. All right, Razorback fans, I got to tell you about one of the great things that you can check out when it comes to NIL. We know it's a big deal, right? Of course it's a big deal. It's always a big deal. Well, this time right now you have a great deal with Roy. It's the newest platform that lets fans make contributions directly to their favorite student athletes. Download Roy for iOS or Android and enter in referral code Locked On. And you'll automatically be entered into sweepstakes to win $5,000 cash. No purchase necessary and void when prohibited. This week, of course, we've selected Landon Jackson, the Razorback defensive lineman who had a great game against Texas A&M this past weekend. Had an incredible game because he hasn't really had any good game at all leading up to this point. Actually got in the backfield a few times, led the team in tackles, had 2 sacks in this one, and the preseason All-SEC selection finally lived up to the billing. And because of that, I'm giving $100 on Roy to Landon Jackson. So if you were impressed, as we were, of course, with his performance on Saturday, you can show him some love too. Just hop on Roy and throw in a few bucks. If everyone pitches in $10, it adds up really fast for Landon Jackson. Now you have the chance to show your appreciation for Landon Jackson in a standout performance this week, as well as what he'll continue to bring into your program. So get off the sidelines and get into the NIL game with Roy. Support the players. Change the game with Roy. Continuing on our discussion with, of course, the sports director of THV 11 down there in Little Rock, it's Tyler Cass. Tyler, we were talking about Arkansas and kind of where things are currently standing in this game against Tennessee and whatnot, and kind of what the fan expectation was. Not into moral victories. No one wants that. But I don't think anybody's thinking Arkansas is going to win this game either. You have a bye week next week. So in order to really keep people even somewhat afloat, interested, believing, faithful, whatever, I mean, what kind of game do we need to see from the Razorbacks in this one against Tennessee? Because I just have a hard time believing that if it's a win or a lose, and if they lose, everyone's off, and if they win, everyone's on board. I still think they can lose and still at least keep people a little bit hopeful for the rest of the year.
Right. It's not a moral victory, but if they are in the game still in the fourth quarter and things have there's noticeable improvements, pretty much everywhere on the ball, then yeah, you can go, okay, this is something that Arkansas can build off of. I think that's what it takes. I mean, if Tennessee is playing their backups at any point in the second half, then I think you're going to start seeing the apathy start to set in, which is the absolute worst thing a program can have. You can live with anger, because if they're angry, they're still plugged in. It's the apathy is where it really starts to bite you, and we've seen that happen, over the last decade plus now with multiple Razorback coaches, and that's where Sam Pittman really wants to avoid it. But and I think there's a realistic world where that happens. I mean, the defense has looked good at times. Landon Jackson earned himself a bit more money this week and build off that, his first really big game of the year against A&M. If he does, an Alabama-esque game breaker performance this week where he's just constantly in the backfield and pesky and making Tennessee rush things, sure, there's a world where Arkansas holds up into the second half. You get a couple bounces to go your way, and you could be right in this thing. But again, like you said, I think everyone is expecting a loss. There is no, I want to say shame in losing to this Tennessee team, but there's a way you can keep the fan base plugged in, and it's show improvement across the board. If the players start looking like they're checked out, which, to Sam Pittman's credit, you haven't seen as much of that, even when things have gotten bad under his reign. But if people start checking out, that's where this thing can go real south real fast.
Something I talked about on my podcast earlier today. I want to get your thoughts on it. I know it's only 5 games in, still have 7 games left at least, but is Arkansas a better team than what they were a year ago right now?
I think so. Because so far we haven't seen anything from this year's team that last year's team could do better, I think. And I think that kind of says more about last year's team than this year's. But last year's team would probably also be 3-2 right now, I think. But I don't think that first half against Oklahoma State is something that last year's team was capable of. And we saw them put it together for pretty much one game against Florida on the road and against a Florida team that, with hindsight, that's not the most impressive thing in the world. I do think that, like I said, last year's team would probably be right about the same place record-wise, but, they weren't going to score every possession against UAPB. They weren't going to show you that they're capable of putting up 600 yards in a game. This year's team, where it almost gets more frustrating, is you see flashes, you see glimpses, but you don't see the end product, and which again is the Arkansas story of the last decade. You're right there, you see the path forward, but it just doesn't happen. Last year's team, I think we kind of stopped seeing the path forward, and I'm not quite there yet this year.
We'll continue on here on the Locked On Razorbacks podcast, talking about Taylen Green specifically. So stay with us on the other side of the break. All right, folks, I got to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. All you NFL fans, college football fans, all you football fans, just in general, you can start the season big with a big return on America's #1 sports book. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. So when you place your first $5 bet, you'll get those bonus bets. It's that simple. It's that awesome. So check it out today at FanDuel.com. That's FanDuel.com, America's #1 sportsbook. Continuing on our conversation with Tyler Cass, sports director of THV 11. So, Tyler, let's talk about Taylen Green. We know what he's capable of. We've seen him at times be really good, but there's no doubt that this past weekend against A&M, Sam Pittman even said as much. He was rattled. He was not as effective. He obviously was not in a good state of mind, and that's not something you want to hear from a veteran quarterback who's your guy, especially getting into the thick of SEC play. So can Taylen Green bounce back, and can he have a good game against the Tennessee team, which, as good as A&M's defense is, statistically speaking, Tennessee's defense is even better?
Yeah, I think he can. I mean, going into the season, even throughout the season, maybe the most consistent thing said about Taylen from coaches, from his teammates, was that mentality, was his leadership. I don't think, as shook and unconfident as he might be coming off that game, if everything that's been said about him is true, that's probably his best intangible, is the ability to shake it off, to continue being a leader that, this team hasn't had at quarterback in a couple years. And therefore the team goes as Taylen goes. At the same time, like you said, the competition's only getting more and more tough. So the actual on-field product, a little tougher to bounce back from. I think he can go into this game with all the confidence in the world, and Tennessee could still potentially run them out of Razorback Stadium, as much as it pains me to say that. You got to put Taylen Green, I think, in opportunities to succeed a bit more. Even, I kind of said it during the A&M game, and I had a couple people coming at me on Twitter, and I said, hey, Taylen Green needs to do something in the pocket to make him more confident in him, because the numbers for Taylen Green passing outside the pocket versus inside the pocket are astronomically apart. They're like, well, the offensive line this and that. I'm like, well, no, Taylen's almost more comfortable on the run. And yeah, the offensive line needs to do a better job of giving him time to just sit there and go through his reads if he needs to, but he needs to do a better job when he has the time. And I think that's the biggest thing for me is the non-broken plays, the plays that are going as designed. We haven't seen him have as much success as, third and Satania is down there somewhere, the best play of the season for him. So, yeah, I think from a mental standpoint, you started to see the cracks. I mean, there was the interception he threw where I think he wanted Broden to come back for the ball and he didn't, and he's kind of signaling at him. He hadn't really seen that yet this year between him and his receiver core. The frustration start to show. But that's where Taylen Green is supposed to be at his strongest, is at a leader and from a mental standpoint. So that will be the biggest test, I think, from him this week is, do we see him keep that up, or does the frustration just continue to get to him, if the defensive line continues to get to him and you have things go even further south?
Well, Tyler, before I let you get out of here, just what do you think happens in this game? Think Arkansas pulls off an upset, or do you feel like it's just it's another day at the office in the SEC for the Razorbacks, close yet no cigar?
You mentioned the home struggles the last couple of years for Arkansas, so you can't just go, well, it's a night game, it's a stripe out, they're going to be jacked up the first half. I mean, look, they're going to be a little banged up coming off A&M. Tennessee's coming off a bye week and not exactly the kind of team that looks like at least it'll be a rusty coming off a bye week. But I do think from a mentality perspective, at least, this team has seemed different than the last couple of years. So if any Sam Pittman team was going to be all jacked up to defend their home turf at 6:30 in front of 70,000 striped out fans, I think it's this one. So I think they can keep it close for a half, and then it just kind of starts to wear and get away from him in the second half. I still think Tennessee covers, but, and maybe this is just me being a little too hopeful, I think we start to see, especially defensively, things come together a bit more. I really liked seeing Landon Jackson in the backfield last week. I think he got the monkey off his back a little bit there. And as long as he keeps moving forward, that defensive line keeps moving forward, Arkansas keeps it playable in the second half. Tennessee still wins and covers, though.
It's going to be an interesting one, to say the least, but 6 o'clock or 6:30? Is it 6:30 or 6 o'clock?
6:30.
6:30, yeah.
They got the late one, yeah.
That's right. It's gonna be right there with Kirk Herbstreit, Chris Fowler on the call, which doesn't happen too often either, but should be a beautiful night in Fayetteville and should be.
Bama, Georgia last week, Tennessee, Arkansas this week. I mean, two games that are
same exact game, same exact stakes, obviously, but should be a great one no matter what. But appreciate it. With Tyler Cass, of course, the sports director at THP11. You can check out their website, thp11.com. And if you're in the Central Arkansas area, be sure to tune in to them for all of their great coverage of all things Razorback, as well as all the news going on in the Central Arkansas area. And Tyler, we appreciate you joining us. Great stuff as always, man. We'll catch up with you next week.
Thank you, and we'll see you on Hog Zone after the game.
That's right. We'll see you then.